stealth technology, the internet, GPS in the palm of your hand, autonomous operation.
Technology is a driver of our times. Since its founding in 1958 in the midst of the Cold War, DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, has been a driver of technology. Welcome to Voices from DARPA, a window onto DARPA's core of program managers. Their job, to redefine what is possible. My name is Ivan Amato, and I'm your DARPA host. Today, I'm pleased to have with me in the studio Jonathan Pfautz, a program manager since 2015 in DARPA's Information Innovation Office. Jonathan earned a PhD in computer engineering from the University of Cambridge in England, but along the way he earned degrees in electrical engineering, computer engineering, and brain and cognitive sciences, all from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Jonathan epitomizes DARPA's deliberate blindness to traditional disciplinary boundaries in search of new research and development territories where perhaps some of the most consequential opportunities for technology development reside. At DARPA, his principal research interests lie at the intersection of the computational and behavioral and social sciences. So thanks, Jonathan, for joining me in the studio today.
It's awesome to be here.
Before we actually dive into some of the really good stuff about how you got to DARPA and how you're thinking about technology, a program that you recently got going, a few other things, I've got to ask you something that I learned about you and your family just in the discussions here at DARPA. And I'm referring here to the naming of your children. So just tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So my wife is also a scientist. So we had a rather long and lengthy discussion about name algorithms and how you, depending on the gender of a child, you might want hard consonants, you might want soft vowels. And then we also, being scientists, started to think about names of scientists that maybe match some of those criteria. So we named our children Tesla and Faraday, and we thought very hard about that because it's pretty nerdy. And we want to be able to also call them Tess and Farah, should they want to tone it down a little bit.
And just how have your daughters responded to having such unusual names like that?
They've loved it. I mean, we made a point of going to the Royal Society in London with Faraday, where they have much of Faraday's original lab equipment all in a really nice, small, not very busy museum. It's been a lot of fun.
So I don't know if you had an opportunity there to tell the curator about your daughter's name, but what happened when you did
Of course. I think the reaction we tend to get is very positive, although sometimes with Tesla that we do get asked about the rock band, and occasionally about I don't know, you may have heard there's a car company out there. And an important part of that story, of course, is who was Nikola Tesla's hero?
And?
Michael Faraday.
Beautiful connection. So I have to say that's quirky, but I say that with great affection, and it is a sure sign of your devotion to science. So let's actually now talk about your background. I mentioned the degrees that you had gotten. So I'd like to hear about that, those interests, and how you ended up actually getting an opportunity to work here at DARPA.
Wow, yeah. So I'll go way back to the Apple II Plus. And my father, with some sort of
give us a date point on that.
1979.
Okay,
and
that is way back.
My father, with some great insight, said, "No, personal computers. We need these in our house," and brought it in. And I don't know if you recall these old magazines like Byte magazine. You would type in programs, and you would type in computer games. And I sat there and I said, "Dad, I want to make my own computer games." And he said, "Here's the manual, son." And he plonks it in front of me. And next thing you know, I started programming and I started to fall in love with computers. Later, once I got to undergraduate, I'm sitting there. I was fortunate to overlap with my sister at the same university. She was studying cognitive science, and I said, "This is amazing. How people think, how they behave, what are the motivations for that? That's fascinating. That's what I want to study." And she looked at me in a way that only an older sister can and said, "Jonathan, if you don't do computer science, you're crazy." So I did both. And that's been my career.
All right. Now, DARPA, did you know about it and seek it out?
DARPA's such an amazing place that it's hard when you're in a field doing research and development and leading other people in doing it to not know about DARPA, to not know about the amazing things that DARPA has done. So for me, it was very natural to say, boy, I could imagine at some point, appropriately in my career, I would love to serve at DARPA and spend those 4 or 5 years of my life here helping. Arriving at DARPA, there's a sense of incredible empowerment that with the wherewithal that you get to really make some extraordinary things happen. Not just, oh, I'm going to run a program, but no, I'm going to write a seminal book with the best people in the world. I am going to change a whole discipline. It's an amazing feeling. And when you do all of that and you tie it back to national security and feeling like you're serving your country, it's a great feeling.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find most fascinating about DARPA is the sort of melting of disciplinary boundaries, which is not so easy to do at many other institutions. You go to a university and typically you're still in a biology department or a chemistry department. Here, those kinds of boundaries almost are irrelevant because it's much more of a projects-directed approach. Could you share your thoughts about that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's part of these superpowers you get as a DARPA program manager is you can I'm remembering my sister grabbing my ear and saying, you should think about this other area. You can grab people by the ear and go, I've watched this field for, in my case, 25 years, and go, it's absolutely ridiculous that these people aren't working together. Or there's a huge opportunity if I can bring these people together in the right way. And that's what we try to do.
All right, so let's talk about how your own mindset is changing now that you're here at DARPA, and we'll move from that kind of into the program that you've begun to rev up the momentum on. So you've made it your mission here to focus on hard problems, one of them being the modeling of large-scale human behavior by way of computer simulations. So I would like you to first talk to me about your views about our increasing connectedness to the global information environment and how that's guiding what you hope to achieve here in your time as a DARPA program.
Yeah, I get so excited when I think about the fact that people are interacting in ever increasingly computer-mediated fashions. Now, I have this opportunity through these kind of computer-mediated interactions to study human behavior at a scale that's never been done before. And what's exciting is people are starting to think about that world. So you'll see some behavioral scientists using mechanical Turk, for example.
Actually, most people would not know what mechanical Turk means, so
sure.
To what?
So Amazon Mechanical Turk is a crowdsourced platform. So I could say, go to Amazon Mechanical Turk, and I would like to pay 200 people to do some simple experiment, which is to say, click on this colored box when you see it type of experiment, or collaborate on a project and let me watch how you do it. So in the social sciences, there's been a huge uptick in people using this particular platform. It's just one. Think about the fact that when you call Uber, that it has data on the drivers, it has data on the people that are getting picked up. Think about Facebook. Think about the fact that they have millions and millions and millions of users around the world. They can do interesting studies on the differences between cultures that we could never conceive of at that scale before. It's an incredibly exciting time for the behavioral and social sciences.
Right. And just one more moment on the mechanical Turk. What's fascinating about even the name of that is it associates with a famous example of an automaton, the mechanical Turk. What's the connection?
I think Amazon's original vision was a mechanical Turk where it's an automaton with a human inside.
Right, and this was a chess-playing automaton that was the center of all kinds of discussions when it first came out, and then it ultimately was revealed to have a human in it. So what is the message?
I think the message is that there are new, ever-increasing opportunities for interacting with humans in a way that would let us understand not just how they're going to act in a particular instance, but what are the kind of causal underpinnings of those behaviors, and why do people act in a certain way in certain situations.
Interesting. So I think that's a good segue into a discussion about the program that you have begun, and it's called the Computational Simulation of Online Social Behavior Program, known in a short form as Social Sim. You've described its goal as developing innovative technologies for high-fidelity computational simulation of online social behavior. But I'd like you to flesh that out for our listeners here.
One of the things to point out when I am rattling off these opportunities about understanding human behavior is understanding human behavior is hard and a far from solved problem. So we often joke, we wish we had the easy problems like the physicists do. Humans are tough. So this program is a fundamental research program. It's not saying we're going to successfully model human behavior. It says we're going to try to start to chew the elephant. We're going to get our very, very tiny teaspoon and start to nibble at this giant problem of what can we understand about behavior. So the goal of this program is to really start to tackle the issue of creating valid simulations or valid models. And there's a lot of folks in the modeling world who will build beautiful models and not do such a great job of proving that they're correct. Then there's people who will go out and do behavioral experiments, but then don't bother to codify that in some sort of computational representation. So how do you think about bringing all of that together in a way where you can say, yes, we built this model, or we built this computational simulation, and we know for some circumstances it works with some level of accuracy. We know when we have things that are right and when we have things that are wrong.
Right, and you're bringing in, again, this massive ability to scale up, or I should say to scale up in a massive way, because you will be tapping in a sort of almost crowdsourcing way and by reaching out through these social media channels, correct?
Absolutely. So one of the things that's different today is this notion of scale, that we have all of these computer-mediated communications. And if we can do all of the appropriate privacy and ethical considerations correctly, which is things like informed consent. You must ask someone if you're going to use their data. Can we then look at this data in aggregate? We're not talking about individuals here. We're talking about group at scale, millions of people who decide we're going to spread a piece of information or not. So we're going from online social behavior, which is potentially a very big space, to a relatively simple behavior, which is the spread of information. So why would you tell me you just saw a great movie? What motivates that? How does that happen? And can we look at the various factors surrounding that as a function of which environment are we in? Is it something that you would tweet about? Is it something you might post on Facebook? Can we do that as a function of the information itself? What kinds of information are more likely to spread? And can we do that as a function of the properties of the population as a whole? This is a population that really is very connected and likes to spread information. This is a population that's more disconnected and doesn't do as much of that. So how do all of those factors interact, and how can we study those and say what we actually know and how well we know it?
So if we were to try to make this a little bit more concrete for listeners, what kinds of questions do you think, or do you know, you will be asking of the researchers who will be working with you on this social sim program that, say, are either relevant to national security or other societally important categories? Yeah,
so I think one of the things in this program we're really focused on is societal benefit as it relates to national security. So what's a great example of this? So, you know, the U.S. military has a mission called humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. So when there's a tsunami or a flood or a typhoon in a foreign country, we may be asked to go help. And one of the things we have to combat in those situations is the spread of rumors, for example. So there's a recent story about a rumor spreading that the bottled water that the U.S. military was bringing was containing mind control substances, and they were going to use it to control the population. Patently false, but it led to a lot of people getting very sick because they weren't drinking safe water. So there's a very concrete example. If we could understand why that particular message got traction, why it spread the way it did, we could maybe help a little bit better in such situations.
Now, I guess moving in a national security direction, there's a phrase I've read, maybe on your program page, that really catches my interest. It's resolving conflicts without force, which sounds like a terrific ideal. Talk to me a little bit about that and the relationship to the kind of work you're doing here at DARPA.
Yeah, the U.S. military is very, very good at the kinetic parts of operations. In fact, arguably without peer in many ways.
And I just want to point out for listeners, by kinetic, that means things that are moving, and you can think of it as metal moving through air, among other things.
So the military also tries to think about operations other than war. So when we get into these humanitarian assistance situations, or we are trying to advise local forces about what's going on, there's a lot of opportunity for us to make a huge difference without metal moving through air, to use your phrase. That seems like a very, very noble goal to me, one that I get very passionate about. Anytime you can save lives without having to be aggressive. I think that's important.
Yeah, this makes me understand a little bit more about your passion for wanting to come here and having some sense that it's possible for you to move the actual sort of practice of warfare away from a kinetic and bloody one into something that where again conflicts are resolved without that kind of force and what comes with it.
It's hard to not come into work in the morning and be passionate about that kind of statement.
Okay, of course, nothing is easy. So the kinds of research that you are doing in which you're scaling up, you're looking at a massive amount of social behavior by way of social media. So this is where people are revealing things about themselves. There are ethics issues, including privacy. So how are you thinking about those issues as you move forward in your programs here?
They're front and center at a level that I don't know that it's been pushed so far in front. And I'll tell you why. When you study the behavioral sciences and you go through, here's how to do human behavior experiments. I keep thinking about Bill Murray in Ghostbusters, where he's doing the shock test to see if people have ESP or not. Yeah. And he's breaking every ethical rule there is in that. And it was very humorous. But when you do behavioral experiments, you have to get informed consent. And that means you have to have someone opt in to doing this. You have to show that there's minimal risk. You have to go through all of the things. As a behavioral scientist, I'm like, okay. But now if you turn to the computer scientist world, they go, well, there's just data. There's data out there. And I go, well, there's data that's about human beings or coming from human beings. And therefore, privacy protections are paramount to us. A fun fact, I don't know if you know this, but if you look at what is in those end user license agreements that you click through without reading, there are things in there that give companies this notion of informed consent to mess with your data.
Yeah, I never read those.
So that's where we need to provide some leadership. We need to say, yes, if we're interested in people's data and we want to understand behavior and we want to do the science of behavior, we have to respect that from the outset. So we've already run privacy and ethics workshops. We have external privacy consultants that we work with. In fact, we have other programs at DARPA that are focused on making sure we address privacy appropriately.
I mean, it's interesting. So DARPA is known for breakthroughs in technology, but it almost sounds to me like you might be moving towards some new territory, even when it comes to consent and these kinds of privacy and ethics issues. Am I
Absolutely.
right?
Our director has said it's not just our responsibility to prevent or anticipate strategic surprise from a technology standpoint, but also from how we actually conduct the research and development that gets us that technology.
So I want to just talk a little bit more about social sim. What I'd like you to do, Jonathan, is give us a sort of a status report. Where is this program at in its life cycle? And then I'm going to ask you to get utopian and imagine the best success that you can imagine with the program. But so first, the status report.
So we have completed source selection, which is to say we received a number of pretty amazing proposals. So now we go into the process of getting those folks onto contract and getting the program off the ground.
And then as it gets off the ground and over the next couple of years, your, as we call our R&D partners, performers, that's DARPA speak. What is your hope? What do you hope in several years when you bring the performers together and you're having a moment of celebration that the program is completed? What do you hope will be the payoff, the deliverable?
It's a field changer. It's a changing the way this kind of research and development is done. I don't think we are going to end up with here is a correct model of how information spreads. I think what we're going to end up with is a research community that much more rigorously, much more scientifically conducts the process of building these kinds of models. And everybody moves forward from that point out to this huge, massive, possibly unbounded space of understanding human behavior.
Right. And one of the things that's really fascinating about human behavior, and I think how you're structuring the program and thinking about it, is that social structures are hierarchical. You and I, Jonathan, right now, we are having a conversation that's a social structure of two. Ben, our audio engineer, is with us. So there's three people in our social structure in the studio. But go up from there, so because we then go to neighborhoods, we go to cities, we go all the way up to a global community, right? So
and
how
those
are you
are
thinking about each of those hierarchical levels?
And those are overlapping. So you are in one neighborhood, you're also in a town. It's not necessarily all hierarchical because you also may be in the group of fathers. You may be in the group of Americans. You may be in the group of people that live on streets called Edison Street.
And when you think about those different categorizations, I mean, what can you learn from in the social behavior of each of those?
And that's one of the interesting challenges we're trying to think about in the program is how do those different, let's call them resolutions or scales at which we can consider behavior, overlap and interact? So how does your identity as a father overlap with your identity as an American, overlap with your identity in your age group, for example? So they overlap, they interact, they may dominate in different situations. So how do those operate? How do we understand a small organization differently than we'd understand a whole region of people?
So another interesting thing at DARPA is that so often the technologies that program managers are working on are powerful enough that they have tremendous promise, but also some potential peril, and some interested in your view of, again, getting utopian. If your program really succeeds, we develop new ways of understanding social behavior at scales that we've never had a kind of access to before. What excites you most about that kind of new way of understanding? And when you think about it, what kind of gives you some pause?
So I get very excited about the societal benefit sides. I get excited about making sure people get vaccinated appropriately, making sure people get appropriate health care, that during crises that we're able to guide people in an appropriate way. I feel very strongly that those are the really beneficial aspects of this. But there's a darker side to it as well, which is I want to be prepared if other nations, governments, groups decide to spread information that isn't so correct. And what do we do about that as a nation? So I like to think about it in kind of three boxes. There's, what is the U.S. government going to do? We have a lot of laws and regulations that are very specific about how we communicate, both with our population and foreign populations, the same as these kinds of privacy and ethics rules. We also have American corporations that may have different rules. They may have got you to click on that end user license agreement. And then we have other folks in the world that have very different perspectives on how you might use these kinds of models of social behavior. So perhaps there's an oppressive regime. Perhaps there's a terrorist organization that I want to understand how they're pushing out their messages and how they're creating influence in a way that, well, I don't think any of us wants.
Right. Now, another thing that came up in another conversation that you and I, Jonathan, have had, in which you kind of revealed to me that not only are you thinking about really large scales, but you're also thinking in terms of the smaller scales, let's say in family units, and the way our relationship to information technology is changing the way we relate to each other and to our machines. And so I'm referring to the issue of politeness that you have a little bit of a sample right in your household. Tell me a little bit of the story of what you're observing about how children relate to machines now.
This actually motivated some work that we're funding. So with my children, we have an Alexa, an Amazon Echo in our home, and they like to ask for jokes. But they also like to ask fun questions like, Alexa, what's the smallest thing in the universe? And Alexa will say, a quark, which is pretty cool. They'll say, Alexa, play music. And then they'll say, Dad, get me some juice. And I'll say, well, wait a second. That's not quite how you should speak to your father. Shouldn't you say, please? And that led me to think quite a bit about etiquette. And there's actually sociological models of etiquette that describe where and how we use phrases like please and thank you with each other. And to me, this is a very natural place to go when you think about information spreading. Why does information spread? How do those pleases and thank yous help or hinder that information may spread?
Are you asking your daughters to be polite with Alexa?
No, I haven't, but it raises a whole nother conversation about how we interact with machines. And do we see machines in the future as partners, teammates, or do we see them as tools? And if we ever want to move beyond that notion of machines as tools, we have to think about some of these sociological principles of how we interact.
Okay, so that actually gets to another question for me, a big one that I wanted to ask of you. So you're talking about how machines kind of are evolving along with us. And when I think about robots and artificial intelligence and these kinds of convergences coming together, there are discussions out there about what happens if we develop artificial intelligence tools, we develop robots where we almost want to say, or we do want to say, these are new types of beings. Ethics comes in here in a huge way. If this is the case and this is how we're going to be thinking about machines, do we have to think about what their rights are? I know you think about this a lot, and I want you to tell me and our listeners how you are thinking about these things.
Sure. So let me just back up from the notion of consciousness first, and let's talk about emergence. Emergence is a kind of fun word because if you start thinking about a society is something that comes out of a bunch of individuals. Pretty interesting that something that isn't planned for can appear almost as a surprise that we have this organized society.
In the physics world, or the chemistry world, I should say, the properties of water emerge out of hydrogen and oxygen, both of them gases in normal conditions. Neither of those has properties of water, but when then combined in a chemical reaction to form water, then you have the emergent properties of water. I just want to connect what you're saying. Emergence in social structures actually has a kind of correlate in these.
Absolutely. And if you go to termite mounds and you go to ant colonies, you see this yeast. You see these amazing emergent properties. So it leads us to ask questions about artificial intelligence. And it leads us down a path to looking where there have been emergent interactions. So if you follow the notion of flash crashes on Wall Street, you have automated trading systems operating in a regulated environment competitively, and occasionally they interact in a way that's unexpected. So we have to ask ourselves, if we're being honest, we have to say we can't always anticipate all of these things. So with all of the discussion today that you hear about safe AI, DARPA, I think, needs to be thinking 10 years out, 50 years out, saying, what if there's something more than simply safety that we need to be considering?
All right. Well, Jonathan, I'm glad that we have a program manager like yourself who's thinking about these things as we all go off without knowing how the future is going to unfold in our new interactions with a massive amount of people and massive machine infrastructure. So you're asking really fascinating questions. This conversation has just been fantastic, and I want to thank you for sharing some time with me.
Of course, I'm happy to share.
And thanks, listeners, for sharing your time with us. I hope you join us again for the next Voices from DARPA. For more information about Jonathan Pfautz, his social SIM program, and the other breakthrough technologies DARPA is working on, visit darpa.mil. And for links that enable you to download this podcast, go to the Voices from DARPA page on DARPA's website.